Most people believe money accelerates in response to effort. More hours, more pressure, more visible strain. But if that were true, exhaustion would be the fastest path to wealth. So here's the real question. Why do results speed up when effort slows down? Leonardo da Vinci understood this centuries ago. He knew that force applied without structure wastes energy, while intelligent design multiplies it. Wealth follows the same rule. It doesn't respond to how hard you push, it responds to how well things are arranged. That principle became clear the first time I noticed outcomes that could not be explained by hard work alone. Results were improving, yet strain was not increasing. There was no urgency, no visible acceleration, and no chaos, which exposed a problem most people never question. When results rise without added pressure, effort is no longer the driver. Structure is. Once effort and results separate, the game changes completely. And the only question that matters becomes this: what system are you operating inside?
Years later, that question resurfaced while I was reading The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Not because the book promised speed or shortcuts, but because it gave language to something I had already begun to sense. It explained how deeply perception, behavior, and structure shape financial outcomes over time. One idea in particular snapped into place for me. Wealth does not grow linearly with effort. It grows exponentially with positioning. When I reduced the entire book to its essence, what remained was this: outcomes are rarely determined by how hard you push, but by where you place yourself inside the system. That realization didn't feel motivational. It felt unsettling, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. That entire book reinforced something Leonardo da Vinci understood centuries earlier, long before modern markets or balance sheets existed. Vinci wasn't obsessed with working harder. He was obsessed with placement, structure, and mechanical advantage. In his notebooks, effort was never the hero. Design was. He observed that a poorly designed mechanism punished the body, while a well-designed one multiplied force effortlessly. Money behaves the same way. Most people push harder inside weak structures and call it discipline. Vinci would have called it inefficiency. He understood that when outcomes disappoint, the solution is rarely more strain. It is almost always a better arrangement of parts. This is where discomfort begins, because it challenges a belief most people quietly depend on. The idea that effort guarantees reward feels moral. It feels fair, but fairness has never governed outcomes. Structure does. When income stalls, people instinctively apply more pressure, longer hours, more sacrifice, less margin. Yet pressure applied inside a flawed system only accelerates exhaustion. Vinci studied human anatomy the same way he studied machines, and his conclusion was consistent. Force without leverage damages the operator. Strength applied in the wrong direction destroys itself. Wealth works no differently. If your income depends entirely on your presence, your energy, and your time, the ceiling is already fixed. So why do some people keep upgrading their skills and still feel like progress stays slow? Think of it this way. Some people improve their results by upgrading their tools, better skills, better credentials, better tactics. That helps, but only marginally. Others move beyond tools and build machines that continue working after their hands are off them. Fewer still design systems where machines coordinate and compound without constant supervision. And at the highest level, a small minority control architectures, structures that move capital, attention, and opportunity automatically. Vinci lived in all four worlds, but he knew the hierarchy. Tools serve machines. Machines serve systems. Systems serve architecture. And architecture is where leverage transforms time into acceleration. Why does income seem to move slowly for most people, yet suddenly accelerate for a small minority? Here's where the idea starts to sound provocative, even unrealistic, until you examine it closely. It is often easier to compress a year of income into a single month than it is to stretch that same income evenly across 12. In some cases, it becomes easier to compress a month into a week or a week into a day. That statement triggers resistance because it contradicts everything people are taught about work and reward. But leverage does not respond to effort the way labor does. It responds to structure. When income scales faster than time, it is not because someone is pushing harder. It is because their wealth strategy is positioned inside a multiplying system. Leonardo da Vinci would have recognized this immediately because he believed true principles repeat themselves across domains. The same laws that govern motion, mechanics, and force also govern outcomes in life. Vinci observed that nature does not reward persistence alone, it rewards efficiency. A well-designed pulley changes what is possible without changing the operator. A well-designed financial structure does the same. This is why income-producing assets matter so much. They are not about greed or speed. They are about alignment. When leverage is embedded into the structure, effort stops being the limiting factor, and outcomes begin to scale independently of time. So how do you prove leverage is real, without motivation, without slogans, and without theory? I'm not sharing this as theory or something overheard in a seminar room. I'm describing how leverage behaves when applied correctly. I've watched periods where income moved faster in weeks than it once did in years, not because activity increased, but because the system changed. Vinci understood this pattern intuitively. He knew that power concentrates where design is superior. It does not distribute evenly over time. When people assume wealth accumulates gradually for everyone, they misunderstand the mechanism. Leverage compounds silently, then suddenly. And when it activates, it doesn't announce itself. It simply accelerates results while others are still applying force. Before we go any further, pause for a moment and look at your own situation honestly. Have you been trying to improve outcomes by refining effort or by redesigning structure? Most people never stop long enough to ask that question, and that's exactly why they stay stuck upgrading tools while ignoring leverage. Insight only matters if it lands. So if this distinction between tools, machines, systems, and architecture hit you, I want you to lock it in. Leave a comment with 1 or 2 words that capture what shifted for you. Something simple like structure, leverage, or blind spot. And if this way of thinking resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe. Not for hype, not for shortcuts, but to join a growing group of people who are done confusing effort with progress. This channel is about clarity, wealth strategy, and understanding how income-producing assets actually work beneath the surface. We're here to study decisions, positioning, and structure, the things that quietly move outcomes over time. Because in the next few minutes, we're going deeper into why leverage feels uncomfortable to most people, why it's resisted, and how the same principles quietly govern wealth everywhere you look. Leonardo da Vinci understood why this resistance exists. He observed that the human mind prefers motion over reflection, activity over redesign. In his studies, people mistook movement for progress and effort for mastery. Vinci wrote that men exhaust themselves not because goals are unreachable, but because they insist on using inadequate instruments. The moment structure changes, the same effort produces radically different results. This is where leverage stops being a concept and becomes a dividing line. Once you see that outcomes obey design more than intention, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why do so few people ever change the structure? I remember a conversation years later that had nothing to do with money on the surface, yet it reinforced the same principle from a completely different angle. The idea was simple. Concepts only matter if they transfer. If something works in one domain but fails in another, it isn't a principle, it's a coincidence. That thought stayed with me because leverage behaves the same way. If structure multiplies outcomes in engineering, communication, or logistics, it must do the same in wealth. When something scales across domains, it's no longer a theory, it's a rule. And rules don't negotiate with effort. So what do you think happens when one person relies on effort while another relies on design? The outcome is already decided. No amount of persistence can override superior arrangement. You can refine technique endlessly, but if the framework is wrong, results remain capped. Leverage doesn't require extraordinary talent. It requires alignment. Once effort is placed inside a multiplying structure, progress stops feeling linear. It bends. This is uncomfortable to accept because it means results were never random. They were structural, and structure always wins over strain. Why do you think endurance is celebrated so much more than efficiency? Leonardo da Vinci warned about this kind of conditioning long before modern economies existed. He observed that institutions survive by training people to perfect execution while discouraging independent design. Skilled hands are useful, strategic minds are dangerous. Vinci believed mastery began the moment someone stopped asking how to work harder and started asking how to arrange forces more intelligently. When people are rewarded for effort alone, they never ask how to leap. They only learn how to endure, and endurance, no matter how noble, was never the path to acceleration. So why does the idea of leverage make so many people uncomfortable the moment it becomes real? Because it quietly exposes a painful possibility. If structure matters more than effort, then working harder was never the solution. And that realization threatens identity. Many people have built their self-worth around endurance, sacrifice, and visible strain. They don't just work hard, they are the hard worker. Leverage destabilizes that story. It suggests that progress doesn't reward suffering, it rewards redesign. And once that thought enters the mind, it's almost impossible to ignore without tension. Why do you think people argue emotionally instead of logically when leverage is introduced? Leonardo da Vinci understood this reaction well. He observed that the mind resists ideas that collapse familiar hierarchies. If effort no longer guarantees status, then status must come from clarity and design. That shift is threatening. Vinci wrote that men defend habits not because they are optimal, but because they are familiar. Leverage forces a reckoning. It asks whether loyalty to exhaustion is wisdom or simply conditioning mistaken for virtue. Years ago, I watched a small online business transform almost overnight without hiring more people or increasing hours. The founder didn't push harder. He changed the structure. One offer replaced 5. One channel replaced scattered effort. One system replaced constant decision-making. Revenue didn't rise gradually. It jumped, then stabilized at a higher level. Nothing mystical happened. The work didn't disappear. It moved into architecture. This is how leverage looks in the modern world. Quiet shifts in design that produce outsized movement, while effort remains constant. Why do the same patterns appear in power, wealth, and control, no matter the era or technology? Leonardo da Vinci believed it was because underlying principles don't change when the stage does. He studied war machines, city defenses, anatomy, and water flow not as separate disciplines, but as reflections of the same mechanical truths. When force is applied efficiently, outcomes multiply. When it isn't, energy dissipates. Wealth strategy follows the same rule. Income-producing assets are simply modern mechanisms that obey ancient laws. The materials have changed, the leverage has not. Here is where most people short-circuit. They hear this and immediately think, that's not fair. Exactly. Fairness is a moral concept. Money is a mechanical one. Markets do not reward exhaustion. They reward positioning. When someone earns 10 times more than another person, it is rarely because they are 10 times more virtuous or disciplined. It is because they are operating inside a structure where effort scales instead of caps. The system does the multiplying, effort only activates it. So where are you actually positioned right now? Are you inside a structure that multiplies effort or one that consumes it? Most people never ask this directly because the answer feels inconvenient. It forces responsibility upward. Once you see that structure determines outcome, blaming circumstances stops working. Vinci warned that men lose power the moment they confuse comfort with truth. If the system you're in cannot scale without you, then no amount of patience will change the ceiling. Only redesign will. Before we move on, let's make this concrete. Where do you honestly spend most of your time right now? Applying effort, improving tools, or redesigning structure? That distinction matters more than ambition. Most people think they're building leverage when they're actually just polishing execution. If this question forces clarity, capture it. Drop a comment with one word that reflects your current position, not where you want to be, but where you actually are. Awareness is the first form of leverage, and without it, every strategy remains theoretical. Leonardo da Vinci approached value the same way he approached invention. He didn't measure importance by difficulty, he measured it by impact. In his notebooks, the most elegant solutions were the ones that moved the most with the least force. Vinci understood that contribution is not flat. It's layered. Some actions move inches, others move systems. Wealth follows this same hierarchy. Income-producing assets sit higher on that stack because they operate through reach and repetition, not presence. The moment effort is replaced by design, value detaches from time. This is where confusion usually begins, because people are taught to measure value the wrong way. They assume more output should automatically mean more reward. It sounds logical. It's also mostly false. Value is not evenly distributed, it is stacked. There are levels to it, and each level obeys different rules. If you don't know which level you're operating on, you can work relentlessly and still stay capped. To understand leverage in practice, you have to see where effort stops scaling and where structure begins to take over. The lowest level of value is implementation. This is where most people spend their entire working lives. At this level, income is generated by exchanging time and physical or cognitive effort for money. You lift, fix, type, assemble, drive, or execute tasks that stop producing the moment you do. There is nothing dishonorable about this level, but it has a hard ceiling. Time is finite, energy is finite. When income depends entirely on presence, growth is capped by design. This is what it means to operate without leverage. Progress only happens while effort is actively applied, and the moment effort stops, so does income. Why does reliance on effort alone leave people so exposed to uncertainty? Leonardo da Vinci warned about this exact vulnerability. He observed that any system dependent on a single point of force is fragile by nature. When one component fails, everything stops. Vinci applied this insight to machines, cities, and human organization alike. A man dependent solely on his own labor has no margin, no buffer, and no protection from shifting conditions. Wealth strategy demands redundancy and structure. Income-producing assets exist precisely to remove dependence from the individual and embed it into design. So if this level is so limited, why do so many people stay here for decades? Because implementation rewards effort visibly. You feel useful, you feel needed, and that feedback becomes identity. Leaving this level feels risky, not because it is unclear, but because it threatens who you believe yourself to be. Yet leverage does not ask for abandonment, it asks for elevation. The question is not whether effort matters, it's whether effort should remain the primary engine. Once that distinction is made, the next level becomes visible and unavoidable. The next level up is unification. This is where effort begins to multiply through coordination. Instead of doing everything yourself, you organize people, processes, or components so work continues beyond your individual capacity. Management, delegation, and orchestration live here. Income rises, stability improves. For many, this feels like success. You're no longer running alone, you're pedaling with others. But this level still has limits. Time remains a constraint. Oversight still requires presence. Growth slows once complexity increases. Unification creates leverage, but it is leverage with supervision attached. Why does growth often stall even after people learn to delegate? Leonardo da Vinci would have recognized this immediately. He understood that coordination multiplies force, but supervision caps it. In his designs, Vinci sought mechanisms that operated continuously without constant adjustment. Applied to wealth strategy, the lesson is clear. When income depends on how many people you can manage or how many systems you can oversee, scale eventually slows. You are no longer running, but you are still pedaling, and pedaling, no matter how efficient, still consumes energy. So why do so many people stop here and mistake this level for arrival? Because it feels powerful compared to effort-only work. The income is better, the status is higher, the stress feels justified. But this plateau hides a quiet trap. If presence is still required for performance, leverage remains partial. Vinci believed real mastery appeared when systems no longer depended on constant correction. Until that point is reached, growth remains conditional. The question becomes whether comfort has replaced ambition, or whether the next level is being avoided because it demands a deeper shift in thinking. Above unification sits communication, the level where income begins to detach from physical effort entirely. At this level, words create value, ideas coordinate action, messages move people at scale. This sounds abstract to those trained to associate real work with strain, but the market proves it every day. Speakers, writers, negotiators, teachers, and leaders earn more not because they work harder, but because their thinking travels further. Communication multiplies reach without multiplying hours. Once value is transmitted through language, leverage accelerates. Effort becomes optional. Structure begins to speak on your behalf. Why do you think control over perception has always preceded control over outcomes? Leonardo da Vinci understood that influence reshapes reality before action ever begins. He studied proportion, perspective, and optics because he knew what people see determines how they move. Applied to wealth strategy, communication is not expression, it is positioning. Whoever frames the narrative coordinates behavior. Whoever coordinates behavior captures value. This is why income-producing assets often begin as ideas before they become systems. Words organize attention, attention organizes action, and action, when repeated at scale, compounds into wealth. So where have you been operating most of your life? Implementation, unification, or communication? Be honest with yourself before answering. Each level feels logical from the inside, but only one begins to remove effort from the equation. If this framework clarified something uncomfortable or revealing, capture it. Drop a comment with one word that reflects the level you're actually on right now, not where you want to be, but where your behavior consistently places you. That awareness alone begins to change how leverage shows up in your decisions. Above communication sits the highest level of value: imagination. This is where ideas, capital, and structure merge into architecture. At this level, money is no longer earned directly. It is designed. Systems are built to produce outcomes without constant intervention. This is where income-producing assets compound most aggressively because effort has been almost entirely removed from the equation. What once felt like extraordinary income begins to look modest, not because desire increased, but because perspective expanded. Imagination changes scale. It shifts the question from how to earn more to what can be built to earn independently. This level feels inaccessible to most people, not because it is rare, but because it is mentally unfamiliar. Imagination exposes limits that were never real, only inherited. Stories absorbed early about risk, stability, and what is realistic quietly form invisible ceilings. As long as those ceilings feel external, they are obeyed. But once they are recognized as internal, they dissolve. Architecture does not demand permission, it responds to clarity. When someone begins to think in systems instead of tasks, the range of possible outcomes expands dramatically, even if visible effort does not change at all. So where do the real constraints exist? Outside you or inside the way you've been taught to think? Leonardo da Vinci believed the greatest limitations were never physical. They were interpretive. He watched people submit to imagined boundaries while ignoring structural alternatives in plain sight. Vinci understood that imagination was not fantasy. It was disciplined vision applied to reality. Once a man stops mistaking inherited rules for natural law, ceilings vanish. At that point, leverage is no longer something to acquire. It becomes something to design deliberately. Why do most people believe progress comes from having more choices when real movement only comes from decision? Leonardo da Vinci was precise about this distinction. To decide in its original sense meant to cut away alternatives. Choice feels safe because it preserves exits. Decision feels dangerous because it closes them. Vinci observed that hesitation weakens structure, while commitment concentrates force. In wealth strategy, this difference is everything. Leverage only activates when direction is fixed. As long as effort is spread across possibilities, power dissipates. Once a decision is made, systems reorganize around it. This is why periods of uncertainty affect people differently depending on their level of leverage. Those operating through effort experience instability as threat. Those operating through structure experience it as opportunity. Leonardo da Vinci studied disorder as carefully as balance. He knew that movement accelerates when others freeze. In markets, volatility creates gaps.
In systems, hesitation creates openings. People above the architectural level do not ignore risk. They reposition around it. They acquire, redesign, and deploy, while others wait for clarity. This is how fortunes are built quietly, not in calm, but in moments of asymmetry. So what feels riskier now? Repositioning deliberately, or remaining dependent on effort as conditions change? Most people misjudge this because they evaluate risk emotionally instead of structurally. They see motion as danger and stillness as safety. Vinci understood the opposite. Stagnation invites decay. Systems that do not adapt collapse under their own weight. Leverage is not about recklessness. It is about alignment with reality as it is, not as it feels. When structure is sound, movement becomes strategic instead of reactive. Leonardo da Vinci understood that leverage ultimately belongs to those who bend conditions instead of submitting to them. He wrote extensively about timing, force multipliers, and positioning, not as abstract philosophy, but as tools for shaping outcomes. Vinci believed fortune favored those who prepared structures in advance, so when conditions shifted, advantage was already embedded. This is the final distinction. Effort reacts, architecture anticipates. When wealth strategy is designed around anticipation, income-producing assets stop depending on favorable circumstances and begin exploiting change itself. Years ago, I built 3 faceless channels that went nowhere. The effort was real, the consistency was there, but the structure was wrong. Then something shifted. Instead of trying harder, I redesigned the system. The next channel worked, then another one did too, and so on. Not because the content suddenly improved overnight, but because the architecture finally supported distribution, clarity, and repetition. That experience taught me something effort never could. Leverage doesn't appear at the moment of creation. It appears at the moment of release. Once the structure is correct, results compound faster each time. Not because the work is harder, but because the system already exists. A message built properly can move independently of the person who created it. This is why communication, distribution, and systems matter so much in modern wealth strategy. You don't get paid for difficulty, you get paid for reach and impact. A single idea, when positioned correctly, can outperform years of scattered effort. The mistake most people make is assuming leverage comes last. It doesn't. It comes first. Structure precedes scale. Design precedes acceleration. And once those pieces are in place, income stops growing by addition. It begins growing by repetition. Before we close, take a moment to reflect honestly on what shifted for you while listening. The most dangerous part of leverage is not learning how it works. It's realizing how long it was available without being used. Once you understand that outcomes obey structure more than effort, staying in the same place stops being accidental. It becomes a choice. Vinci believed awareness was the moment responsibility begins. From that point forward, results are no longer dictated by circumstance, but by design. When clarity replaces confusion, movement becomes intentional, and intentional movement is where wealth actually begins to accelerate. So let me ask you one final question.
After everything you've heard, where do you see yourself now? Effort, structure, or architecture? Drop a comment with one word that captures where this landed for you. If this way of thinking resonates, subscribe. This channel is about principles, decisions, and clarity, not hype. And I don't sell tools here. I focus on understanding leverage first. But when it comes to wealth creation, structure matters. There is a simple system I personally use to keep finances clear and organized, without complexity, without subscriptions, and without giving up control. One single purchase, clear structure, full ownership as we move into 2026. If that sounds useful, you can explore it using the link below. And if not, this video stands on its own. Clarity always comes first. This was the leverage rule that makes money move faster. We explored why effort alone stays capped, how structure changes outcomes, and why leverage has always been the real driver behind accelerated wealth. This is just the beginning. The next video is coming very soon, and we'll go even deeper into how these principles apply in the real world. And if you found value today, I highly recommend watching my next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, feel free to leave your comment below. I appreciate your support. Thank you for being here, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.